When my son got married last September, I kept one secret I never shared with anyone. I never mentioned that 6 months earlier, my late wife had quietly transferred the deed of her family's lakefront property in Muskoka entirely into my name. And thank God I stayed quiet. Because exactly 9 days after, I wrote a check for $87,000 to pay for their wedding at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake. My brand new daughter-in-law sat down across from me at my own kitchen table, with a real estate lawyer, a notarized letter, and a smile that made my stomach go cold. But that smile disappeared the moment she realized the document she had brought to strip me of everything I owned had just become the rope she was going to hang herself with. Before I tell you exactly how that happened, let me say this. My name is Gordon Whitfield. I am 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a pipe fitter in Northern Ontario, working remote jobs up near Timmins and Coppiscasing, coming home with my knuckles cracked from the cold, and my back stiff from bending under frozen crawl spaces. My wife Adele and I raised our son Owen in a small house in Barrie. Nothing fancy. We clipped grocery coupons. We drove used cars. We took one vacation a year, always somewhere within a day's drive. That was our life, and I was proud of it. To Vanessa, Owen's new wife, I was just a tired old tradesman with dirty boots and no ambition. She had no idea that Adele had come from a family that owned 140 acres on the eastern shore of Lake Muskoka, a property that had been in her family since her grandfather built the original cabin there in 1951. Adele and I had always kept that quiet. We didn't talk about it at backyard barbecues. We didn't post pictures of the dock on social media. We just drove up there every summer, sat on the porch, and watched the loons. That was enough for us. Vanessa only saw the surface. She saw an old man who drove a 2009 pickup and wore the same flannel jacket to every family dinner. 9 days after I paid for that wedding, she was sitting at my kitchen table in Barrie, explaining, very calmly, that she and Owen had been doing a lot of thinking. "Gordon," she said, folding her hands on the table the way you would in a job interview, "Owen and I are genuinely worried about you rattling around in this house alone. You're getting older. This place is too much to manage on your own. We've looked into a really lovely retirement community just outside Collingwood. Clean, well-run, affordable. But before we can get that sorted out, we'd need you to transfer the title of this house over to us so we can use the equity to cover the monthly fees." I sat very still. A retirement home in Collingwood. I was 67. I still split my own firewood. I hiked the Ganaraska Trail every November. My doctor had told me at my last checkup that my blood pressure was better than most men 20 years younger. I turned my head slowly and looked at Owen. He was standing near the back door with his arms crossed, staring at the floor tiles. He was 34 years old. I had driven 4 hours each way to watch every single one of his junior hockey games. I had co-signed his first car loan. I had handed Vanessa a check at their engagement party because she said they needed help with a deposit on their condo in Oakville. "Owen," I said. He shifted his weight and looked up briefly, then back down at the floor. "It just makes sense, Dad," he said. His voice was flat, like he was reading from a card someone had written for him. "You can't keep up with the property taxes on your own, and the house needs work. It's not fair to you. Not fair to me." He said it like I should be grateful. The lawyer Vanessa had brought, a quiet man named Robert, who clearly wanted to be anywhere else in the world, cleared his throat and slid a document across the table. "If you could just initial the highlighted sections," he said softly. I looked at the papers. I looked at the highlighted sections. I looked at the gold-tipped pen Vanessa had placed beside the document like it was a gift. I thought about Adele. Adele had passed 11 months earlier, in October, from a cancer that moved faster than any of us expected. In the last weeks, when she was still sharp but her body was failing her, she had sat with me in the hospital room and talked for a long time. Not about dying, about Owen. She said she'd been watching him change for 2 years, ever since Vanessa came into his life. She said she was worried about the kind of man he was becoming. Soft in the wrong places and hard in the wrong ones. She made me promise to be careful. She said, "Wait and see who he really is before you give him anything." I had tried to believe she was being too hard on him. I was not believing that anymore. I reached out toward the gold pen. I let my hand tremble slightly. I made my voice sound thin and uncertain. "I'm just I'm not sure I understand all of this, I said, looking at Robert. Could you walk me through the section about the property transfer? I'm finding it hard to follow. Robert began explaining haltingly, and as he talked I noticed Vanessa's jaw tighten with impatience. She wanted this done before I had a chance to think too hard. You know what, I said, pressing my hand flat on the table and pushing myself up slowly. I need my reading glasses. They're upstairs. Just give me a moment. Owen made a small noise of frustration. Dad, we've been here for an hour already. I know, I said, keeping my voice soft and a little bewildered. I just want to read it properly. Adele always said I should read everything twice. I shuffled out of the kitchen. The moment I reached the upstairs hallway, I closed the bathroom door, turned on the tap, and took out my phone. I called Patricia. Patricia Nguyen had been Adele's lawyer for 15 years and had become mine by extension. She was sharp, fast, and deeply unimpressed by people who tried to cut corners on property law. When she answered, I spoke quickly and quietly. I told her Vanessa was downstairs with a real estate lawyer and a quitclaim deed, trying to get me to sign over the house while Owen stood there and watched. Patricia didn't waste words. Do not sign anything, she said. Tell them you've consulted a lawyer and that all further communication needs to go through my office. Then ask them to leave. What if they push back? Gordon, it's your house. They cannot legally compel you to sign a single piece of paper. If they refuse to leave, call the police. I'll start preparing an emergency protective order tonight just in case. I thanked her, turned off the tap, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the upstairs hallway. On the small table outside the bathroom, Adele had kept a framed photo of the two of us at the Muskoka property. We were standing on the dock, squinting into the summer sun, both of us laughing at something someone off camera had said. She looked so alive in that photo. She always looked more alive up there than anywhere else. I had not told Owen and Vanessa about the Muskoka property transfer. Adele had arranged it quietly, through Patricia, 8 months before she died. Her reasoning was simple. She had seen what was coming before I had. She moved the title before her estate went through probate, before any inheritance claim could muddy the waters. The property, free and clear, no mortgage, no liens, assessed at just over $2 million by a certified appraiser the previous spring, was registered entirely in my name. To Vanessa, I was an old pipe fitter with a modest house in Barrie and a government pension. She had no idea. I went back downstairs, moving slowly, holding the railing. I've been thinking about it, I said, settling back into my chair. And I've decided I'm not going to sign today. I'm going to have my own lawyer look this over before I make any decisions. The room changed immediately. Robert quietly gathered his papers and looked at the ceiling. Vanessa's face went from polished concern to something else entirely. She uncrossed her legs and sat forward. Gordon, we are trying to help you, she said, and the warmth was completely gone from her voice now. Owen and I have put a lot of time and energy into finding you options. Do you have any idea how stressful this is for us? I imagine it's quite stressful, I said pleasantly. Owen stepped away from the back door. His voice had changed too. Something tighter in it, something I didn't recognize. Dad, if you won't cooperate with this, we're going to have to look at other options. I can go to court and request a capacity assessment. I can have a doctor declare you unfit to manage your own affairs. Do you understand what that means? That means a judge decides what happens to your property, not you. That means you lose control of everything. I looked at my son. I had once held that boy in my arms in the delivery room at Royal Victoria Hospital in Barrie and cried. I was 33 years old and I had never cried from happiness before in my life. I understand what you're saying, Owen, I said quietly. Then sign the paper. I'm not going to do that. He stared at me for a long moment, then looked at Vanessa. Some silent agreement passed between them. Fine, Vanessa said, standing up and picking up her bag. We tried. Don't come to us when this gets harder. They left. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after they drove away. The house was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming and a cardinal outside the window. I had not been entirely idle during the 6 weeks leading up to that morning. The first sign had come at Owen's bachelor party, of all places, a small gathering, just 8 of us, at a rented cottage near Huntsville. Late in the evening, after most of the others had gone to bed, I had stepped outside for some air and walked around to the side of the cottage to use the outdoor tap to rinse my boots. Owen and Vanessa were on a call together. She had phoned him around midnight, which I thought was strange, and I could hear him through the open window of the living room. I didn't intend to listen, but what I heard stopped me where I stood. Owen was explaining to Vanessa, quietly and methodically, that his father's house in Barrie was worth somewhere around $650,000. That once they got me taken care of, as he put it, they could sell it and use the equity to pay off the condo in Oakville and still have $200,000 left over to invest. He told her he'd been looking into the capacity assessment process in Ontario and said it was easier than people think. He mentioned a colleague of his who had done something similar with his own father. He said, "The key is not to let him get legal advice before he signs." Then Vanessa's voice came through the phone, and even muffled I could hear the brightness in it. "And the Muskoka property?" she asked. Owen paused. "I don't know for certain it exists," he said. "My mother used to talk about it when I was a kid. But if it does, and if it's in the estate, we'll deal with that through probate once Dad is out of the picture legally." Out of the picture, legally. I stood there in the dark beside that cottage for a long time. An owl went over. The lake was black and still. I thought about Adele saying, nearly a year before that night, "Wait and see who he really is." I walked back inside, said goodnight, and went to bed. I didn't sleep, but I made a plan. Over the next 6 weeks I did several things. I called Patricia and told her what I had heard. Together, we reviewed the Muskoka title transfer and confirmed it was clean, properly registered, entirely outside the estate. We contacted a retired Ontario provincial police detective named Stewart, a man Patricia had worked with before, and arranged for him to install a small, legal home security system with audio recording capability in the common areas of my house. In Ontario, you can legally record conversations in your own home as long as you are present, and I was going to be present. I also quietly began reviewing Adele's will with Patricia. Adele had not been naive. She had never been naive about anything in her life. After 38 years of marriage, I should have known better than to be surprised by what Patricia showed me. Adele had structured Owen's inheritance with a condition. Not complicated, not punitive. Just a single clear requirement. If Owen ever attempted to legally remove me from my primary residence, or attempted to initiate a capacity assessment against me for the purpose of gaining control of my assets, the inheritance would be redirected entirely. Not to charity, to me. Her reasoning, written in her own words in the accompanying letter she had left with Patricia, was this: "I have saved enough in my life to make sure Gordon is comfortable after I'm gone. If Owen has become the kind of man who would take that from his father, then he has already lost the most important thing I ever tried to give him. There is no amount of money that fixes that." The inheritance she had set aside for him was $420,000 in a locked GIC account at a credit union in Barrie. $420,000 that Owen did not know existed. He had come to my kitchen table to steal a house worth $650,000. He had no idea there was money already designated for him, waiting, as long as he behaved like a decent human being. He had failed that test completely. After the morning they left my kitchen table empty-handed, I gave it 3 weeks. I watched the security recordings. I reviewed my files. I let Patricia prepare. They moved faster than I expected. 2 weeks after the kitchen confrontation, Owen filed an application in Superior Court for a guardianship assessment, claiming I was showing signs of cognitive decline and was unable to manage my financial affairs. He attached a letter from a private assessment clinic, not my doctor, not anyone who had ever met me, just a clinic he had apparently found online, suggesting I warranted evaluation. Patricia filed our response within 48 hours. My own physician submitted a letter confirming I had shown no signs of cognitive impairment at any examination. The application was thin, and the judge clearly found it irritating. But Owen wasn't done. Through the recordings from my home security system, I learned that he and Vanessa had spent considerable time trying to locate the Muskoka property in the land registry. They had found it, and they had found, incorrectly, that they believed the transfer to me had happened too close to Adele's death to be valid. Vanessa had apparently consulted a lawyer of her own, not a very good one, who suggested there might be grounds to challenge the transfer as a fraudulent conveyance if they could argue it was made to defeat creditors. This theory was wrong. Adele had no creditors. The transfer had been made 8 months before her death, well within the clear period, properly documented. But Owen and Vanessa didn't know that. What they did next still makes me shake my head. They contacted a private buyer, a real estate developer based in Vaughan, who specialized in recreational property acquisitions in cottage country. Without my knowledge, without any legal authority to do so, Vanessa signed a letter of intent on behalf of the estate of Adele Whitfield, offering the Muskoka property for sale at a negotiated price of $1.6 million, with a conditional closing date 3 months out. She had found a notary, a retired one who apparently did occasional private work, who had helped her prepare the letter on what she described to him as a routine estate file. She had also, in that document, signed my name. Not as a copy, not in quotation marks. She had signed my name, Gordon Whitfield, as authorizing vendor. Patricia called me on a Tuesday morning to tell me, "They've crossed from a civil matter into criminal territory," she said. "Force, fraudulent misrepresentation. And because they've sent the letter to a developer by email, there's also the question of wire fraud." Her voice was very calm, in the way that lawyers' voices get calm when they know they are holding a very strong hand. I asked her what she wanted to do. She said, "Let's let them believe it's working for a little while longer." The developer, Patricia explained, had already pulled a preliminary title search. Because the property was registered in my name, not the estate, his search had flagged a discrepancy. He had paused the process and quietly contacted a real estate lawyer of his own, who had noted the problem. He had not told Owen and Vanessa this. He was waiting to see what happened next. We let 2 more weeks go by. I drove up to Muskoka on a Thursday in late November, 4 days before Owen and Vanessa had arranged to meet the developer on site for what they believed would be a property walkthrough before finalizing the letter of intent. Patricia had spoken with the developer's lawyer and arranged everything. The OPP had been contacted. A plainclothes officer from the local detachment would be present. The drive up the highway was quiet. The tourist traffic was long gone, and the trees were bare. I stopped at a Tim Hortons in Gravenhurst, got a large double-double, and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes just thinking about Adele. About how she used to make me drive through Gravenhurst no matter which route we took, because she liked the look of the main street in the fall. About how she used to fall asleep in the passenger seat somewhere around Severn Bridge and wake up right as we turned down the gravel lane to the property, like she had an internal alarm for that particular road. I got back on the highway and finished the drive. The property looks different in November. The maples are bare, and the dock has been pulled in, and the lake is gray and very still. But it is still beautiful in a stripped-down way I have always liked better than the summer crowds. I unlocked the cabin, turned on the baseboard heaters, made coffee on the old propane stove, and sat in Adele's chair by the window. Patricia arrived at 9 the next morning with a colleague from her firm. The plainclothes officer, a woman named Corporal Dufresne, arrived shortly after and introduced herself quietly and shook my hand. We waited. Owen and Vanessa arrived at 11 in a rented SUV, which struck me as strange. They drove a perfectly good car, but I suppose they wanted to look prosperous for the developer. The developer's rep, a man in a heavy wool coat, was already parked at the end of the lane. Owen got out of the SUV looking the way he always looked when he was confident. Shoulders back, jaw forward, that expression of quiet certainty he had developed sometime in his mid-20s that I used to find reassuring and now found hollow. Vanessa got out on the passenger side wearing a coat I hadn't seen before, expensive-looking, dark green, with large buttons. She was carrying a leather portfolio. They walked toward the developer's representative, shaking hands, laughing a little. Owen gestured broadly toward the lake. Vanessa unzipped the portfolio and began to pull out papers. Neither of them had looked at the cabin yet. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The sound of Owen's voice stopped mid-sentence. Vanessa turned. The color left her face in a way that I will never forget. It just went, like someone had turned off a light behind her eyes. Owen took a step backward. His hand came up slowly, like he was trying to find something to hold on to, and landed on the side mirror of the SUV. "Dad," he said. His voice came out strange, cracked and small in the open November air. I didn't say anything right away. I stepped down off the porch and walked slowly down the gravel path toward them. Behind me, I could hear the cabin door open again as Patricia and her colleague came out. The developer's representative stepped aside. He had been briefed. Vanessa recovered first. She always recovered first. She pulled the papers from the portfolio and held them up, and her voice when she spoke had that tight brightness to it that meant she was frightened but refusing to show it. "Gordon, this is all perfectly legal," she said. "We have a letter of intent signed by the estate representative. This property is part of Adele's estate and we have every right to." "The property is not part of Adele's estate," Patricia said, stepping up beside me. She was wearing her gray coat and carrying her briefcase and looked very unimpressed. "It was transferred to Gordon Whitfield 8 months prior to Adele's death. The transfer is registered, documented, and entirely valid. The title is clear. This has been confirmed by 2 independent title searches." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "the letter of intent you submitted to this developer's firm contains a forged signature. My client did not sign that document. He did not authorize the sale of this property. He did not authorize you to represent the estate in any capacity." She opened her own briefcase and removed a folder. "I have here an affidavit from the notary you retained, in which he states that you provided him with false information about the nature of the file, and that he was unaware the signature was not obtained from the property owner directly." Vanessa stared at the folder. "The notary has already cooperated with investigators," Patricia added. The developer's representative quietly walked back to his car and drove away without a word. Owen had not moved from the side of the SUV. He was looking at me now, and the confidence was completely gone. He looked the way he had looked at 7 years old, when I caught him breaking a neighbor's window with a hockey puck and trying to blame it on the kid next door. Not angry, just small. Suddenly and completely small. Corporal Dufresne stepped forward, introduced herself by name and rank, and said she needed to speak with them both. I watched Owen's face when he heard the word officer. I watched Vanessa drop the portfolio. I walked back up to the porch and sat in the old wooden chair and wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. I heard Dufresne explain to them clearly what the charges were and what the process would look like from here. I heard Vanessa start to argue and then stop arguing. I heard Owen say, "I want to call a lawyer," in a voice so quiet it barely reached me. He had the right to do that. I was glad he knew that. I sat on the porch until the OPP cruiser that Dufresne had called came down the gravel lane. I sat there until they were gone. The lake was very still, and a pair of mergansers were working their way along the far shore. Over the following months, the legal consequences moved forward steadily, in the way that serious consequences tend to do when the evidence is thorough and the documentation is clean. The forgery charge was significant. In Ontario, forging a signature on a land transfer document is taken seriously under the criminal code, and the fact that it had been transmitted electronically to a developer added a layer that the Crown prosecutors found straightforward to work with. Vanessa faced the more serious exposure because she had been the one to sign the letter and to misrepresent the file to the notary. Owen's lawyer, a real one and a good one, which I was grimly glad for, managed to negotiate a position of greater cooperation in exchange for reduced exposure, which meant Owen had to be very honest about the full extent of what they had planned. That honesty included the conversation I had heard through the cottage window at the bachelor party. They had recordings of that, too, as it turned out. Owen had accidentally pocket-dialed Vanessa's sister at some point that evening, and the sister, who had never particularly liked Vanessa, had saved the recording and, once the legal situation became clear, had turned it over without being asked. The divorce happened quickly. It often does in situations like that, when the shared project that held 2 people together has been fully destroyed. Owen lost the condo in Oakville because the mortgage was structured in a way that couldn't survive his legal bills. He moved into a rental apartment in Barrie, close to where he had grown up, in a building I drove past occasionally on my way to the hardware store. I never stopped in. He knew where I lived. He called me once, in February, from a number I didn't recognize. He had borrowed someone's phone. When I answered and heard his voice, I sat down at the kitchen table. Dad, he said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not calling for that. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I didn't say anything for a moment. I know you are, I said. I don't know how I got there, he said. I keep trying to understand it, and I can't quite. I know, I said. I can't quite either. We were quiet for a while. Your mother knew, I told him. She saw it coming before either of us did. That's why she set things up the way she did. I heard him breath out slowly on the other end. Is there anything I should know? He asked. About what she left. I mean, if there was something she intended for me. I thought about the $420,000 locked away in Barrie, waiting for a man who behaved like Adele's son. There was, I said, but the condition she attached to it was one you didn't meet. That's not a punishment from me, Owen. That was your mother's decision, made a long time ago. She knew you better than you knew yourself. She loved you enough to make the hard call. He didn't speak for a long time. Where did it go? He asked. Back to me, I said, because that was her instruction. I paused. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. He didn't ask me to give it to him. I'll say that for him. He didn't ask. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The cardinal was back at the feeder outside the window. Same one, I was fairly sure. Same notch in the tail feather. There are people, I imagine, who would have handled all of this differently, who would have picked up the phone the moment they heard their son through that cottage window and screamed and wept and demanded an explanation. I understood that. I had spent a number of nights in those 6 weeks doing something very close to that, alone in this kitchen with a glass of whiskey and Adele's photograph on the table. The grief and the anger are real, and they don't go away quickly. But I had learned something from Adele over 38 years that I couldn't unlearn. She used to say that the loudest response is rarely the most powerful one. She said it about everything, about arguments and negotiations, and moments when you feel like you've been wronged. She said, be quiet, be patient, be absolutely sure of what you know, and then act. She had practiced what she preached right up until the end. I used the money from the GIC, My Money Now by Adele's design, to set up a small bursary at the college in Barrie. Trades and technology students, first-generation financial need. Not a huge bursary, a few kids a year, enough to make a real difference to the right person. I named it after Adele. I drove up to Muskoka in the spring, when the ice had just come off the lake, and the birches were doing that thing they do in early May when the light hits the new leaves and the whole forest goes almost gold. I put the dock back in myself. It took me most of a morning, and my back complained for 3 days after. I sat on the dock that evening, with a cup of coffee, and watched the sun go down behind the tree line. Somewhere across the bay, a loon called once, twice, and then went quiet. Adele had always said she could hear that bird all the way from the cabin porch, and that it meant the season had really started. Every year, same call. She used to put her coffee down and just listen. I put my coffee down and listened too. The water was very still and the sky went orange, and then pink, and then a deep, quiet blue. I stayed until the first stars came out, which is what Adele always made us do. She said you couldn't leave before the stars, or you hadn't really arrived. I stayed until the stars came out.